is Christopher Deneen, and welcome to the New Normal. This is the beginning of a new webinar series on how we can successfully teach, learn, and engage with our students in the current crisis and beyond. And our first topic is one that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds right now, which is examinations. And how do we, in the current crisis, conduct examinations effectively, efficiently, fairly, but then also what are the lessons learned that we want to help us move forward, what's sustainable and what's not. And so what I'll do is that I'll just let the panelists go ahead and introduce themselves rather than my attempting to give a bio background. I'll just start off. My name is Chris Deneen. I'm a senior lecturer with the Melbourne Center for the Study of Higher Education. And my area of research interest and professional development strongly centers around assessment and examinations. And I just put out a guide on open book online examinations, which you can find through the center website as well as on the TEXA Expert Hub. Maybe we'll just go around. Kat, would you mind telling us about yourself?
Sure. Catherine Manning from Learning Environments at the University of Melbourne. I'm the Manager of Learning and Teaching Support. And Learning Environments, we've very much supported the technology around assessment. And with the recent moving to fully online exams, we've been very much involved in the technical solution for that and working with the exam office to roll that solution out. So I'm here to provide the technological sort of background to this conversation, and as well as my research and understanding around assessment practices. Thanks.
Who's next?
I'll go. I'm Thomas Cochrane, so I'm probably the newest member to the MCSHE team here at University of Melbourne, and currently remote from Auckland because of the COVID-19 border closures. So a rather interesting way to start a new job, and not quite sure exactly when I'll actually physically get to Melbourne, but hopefully one day. So yeah, really excited to be part of this new webinar series, and my role is really around technology enhanced learning. And so I guess that's kind of the theme that I'll be bringing to these discussions.
Great, thank you, Tom.
Siew is my name. So I'm a senior lecturer with the Melbourne Center for the Study of Higher Education. And my role with the centers is focusing on engagement, collaboration, and partnerships. And I'm really excited with this webinar.
Great, thank you, Siew. And we'll be having Brian Martin dropping in and out, who is doing a lot of interesting work with Chancellery right now around digital technologies, e-portfolios, as well as teaching and learning solutions. But because of examinations, he is a super busy person right now, so hopefully he can join us in and out. So today we'll be certainly talking about the technology, but not as a separate category. I think today we agreed that we would weave that in to some other topics around online open book exams. And those include assessment considerations. What should or shouldn't we be doing in terms of assessment? What are the concerns that should be on our mind that are assessment related concerns? Engagement as well. And here we're asking questions like, are our students ready for online examinations? To what degree? In what ways should we be helping with that readiness? And then a question that's on everyone's mind, what about academic integrity and cheating? And we'll be exploring a few issues around that. And then finally, we're going to wind it up, I think, with all of us talking just a little bit about what we think are some important takeaways or tips. So with that in mind, I'll just start off by talking a little bit about the assessment. You know, something I've been talking a lot about, I was sharing with Catherine before this, a lot of people are interested in how do we transition from a traditional invigilated closed book examination to a scenario in which we really cannot watch what the students are doing in their own homes. There are programs and technologies that allow you to do that, and maybe we'll talk a little about that, but let's assume that you can't. In an open book setting then, In other words, where we have to accept that students are going to be using materials, what should or shouldn't we be doing? And I have my own ideas about it, but let me throw it open to the panel. What do you think we should or shouldn't be doing in terms of open book versus closed?
I guess a lot of it comes back down to the actual assessment design, and the assessment design really should be focused upon the graduate outcomes that you're trying to achieve. What are you trying to measure to start with? And is this, I guess the first question is this appropriate way of measuring that? So it is pretty much a fundamental of, do you require an exam or not? And is that really aligned to what the learning outcomes of this particular course are?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we're seeing a move, even from accrediting bodies, to really question the validity of exams as a way to measure the skills that we really want students, graduates to have. The critical thinking, the working collaboratively in groups, these are fundamental skills to the workplace, and none of these can easily be tested in a closed book exam format. So there is a push from industry for our assessment practices to be more in line with what they need the students to walk away from university, the skills they need students to have.
Yeah, I think the themes that come through from employers are the big C's, aren't they? Sort of creativity, collaboration, community, etc. And those are quite difficult to measure with an exam as such.
Mm. Yeah.
Just on mute there,
Siew. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. This technology. Yes. So talking about the broader community and the stakeholders and being creative, I think the stakeholders are actually broader than our students in a sense. So whether we need to consider this is what the students want, or whether this is what our employers want, in terms of the policymakers. And I could draw an example of, for example, international students, recipient of scholarships from the government, may have certain expectations of the type of assessments required in order to graduate, to fulfill the scholarship criteria to get into a master's in psychology or PhD degree in particular entry point. Yeah. And
there's also the stakeholders of accrediting bodies, isn't there? So if you're doing a law degree, etc., for example, then the accrediting bodies require currently a form of exam, and often that's actually closed, isn't it? A closed form of exam. So how do you get around that? How do you deal with that?
I think there is Chris is not getting a chance to talk here, but I think there is a educational piece with this sort of move away from the exams in universities to open book or different types of assessments entirely, more authentic type assessments, because I think people, when I talk to people out in the public right now about the university having to move to online exams, and they go, well, how can that really work? How can that be authentic? How do we know that the students aren't cheating? And people aren't in the conversations we're having about authentic assessment and the workplaces wanting different types of skills. And there needs to be a broader conversation about what really is assessment beyond the university walls to have the university degree seen as valid in different formats, different accrediting processes.
Yeah, and even for the university, you'd hope so anyway, to actually be leading. What does it look like, for the 21st century to be a graduate in different contexts and employment in those? It's certainly hopefully changing and different, and certainly after COVID-19 the world has changed. So what is the world going to look like, and what sort of capabilities do our students actually really need now?
Well, the big issues are the sustainable issues often, aren't they? And I think what I'm hearing are that the big issues of assessment considerations are, who are our stakeholders really? What constitutes good assessment and how do we define it? And what are the expectations and the requirements of the stakeholders that bridge between the people that we serve and the expectations that we have? And, from an assessment point of view, something I'm immediately picking up on is this tension between authenticity and validity.
Mm.
On the one hand, we want assessments, and of course so do a lot of stakeholders, that in some way plug into what students are going to do out there in the real world. And that's not just employability, it's also citizenship, it's plenty of things. But examinations, as we traditionally see them, you know, quietly seated in rows with a blue book in front of you, those aren't very authentic. But at the same time, some of those same people who want the authenticity are saying, yeah, but how can we assure that the legitimacy of the results, how can we assure that there's, you know, there isn't some kind of a subversion when you're allowed to do something that's more authentic on your own?
Yeah, and that does seem to come from a very negative perspective of the ethics of students, that students will inherently want to cheat.
It's a bit of a deficit model, isn't it?
Yeah. And therefore, how do we know that it's actually the correct student on the end of the computer doing this online exam? It just throws a whole lot of real big issues there. And that's where you jump into how do you do invigilating or proctoring that you would normally do face-to-face in a classroom with someone wandering around checking, to doing that online. And do we buy into proctoring software, or how do we approach that, or do we do it a bit more creatively like University of Melbourne's been doing? This is where Brian would be great to sort of jump in, but he's not back yet, but using Zoom sessions to virtually sort of proctor exams, you know.
It's a low-level proctoring. I've been quite involved in those meetings with Brian, and the real sort of strict proctoring solutions like ProctorU are very invasive to the student's computer, to their student's room that they're sitting in, and things like that. They do things like they require the student to show the whole room that they're in before, and their disk space before they start the exam. They have to prove their identity, and the ProctorU needs a whole lot of information that we wouldn't normally share with our vendors about our students to be able to run that exam. And we have not gone that far. We definitely haven't gone that far. Those Zoom sessions have been really, we're not calling them proctoring at all. And it's really meant to be that it's open book, and students will be able to access other resources. They're not getting their computer controlled, because the proctoring will have an applet that will take over your computer and let you run some things and not others. None of that's going on. It really is just observing the students sitting there doing the exam.
To me, I think that, I think we need to maybe encourage conversations to distinguish the difference between exam and assessments. I think once we really unpack that, assessment is so broad and diverse. We can get students to film their work in a different context, and then still share in a way. It doesn't require a book, but fit in the criteria, assessment criteria of citizenship, creativity, collaboration, and community, but doesn't require a book. So once we unpack the difference between exam, which is a more traditional way of looking at sitting down and answering a series of questions with a book or without book, but reopening the imagination, so reimagining assessments that can be different and creative, starting to shift those perceptions, understanding of tests. I think that would be a good way to me to have that conversation.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest issues that I always hear around, you know, why have an exam apart from perhaps there's an accreditation process involved, is just the issues of the logistics. If you've got 1,000 students and you're going to do project-based learning assessment, then there's 1,000 projects you have to mark, and that sort of seems like, wow, that's a whole lot of work, and who's going to do that? But then, having said that, if you go down the proctoring route, there's a whole lot of work involved around proctoring exams, isn't there? A huge amount of work. Yeah. And I was just sort of briefly having this conversation with Brian yesterday, so I thought maybe we could segue into Brian talking about how, you know, some of the pragmatics of how you're doing that. And I think that just kind of brings up that whole issue of is this actually really pragmatic in the end, and would something like a project-based assessment actually be worse than what we're currently doing with proctoring? Breaking it up into peer review, etc. So, yeah, I'd be interested to see exactly what the process is, Brian. Just a brief overview.
Yeah, so talking about the Zoom ID verified exam types, and apologies, I had to drop out because there were some issues with some that are running right now that I had to address. So I totally agree that it's an assessment and examination type that has a huge amount of moving parts involved, and they're moving parts that the student has to deal with. The person supervising the exam has to deal with, the subject coordinator has to deal with, the examinations office who are administering the exams have to deal with. It does introduce a huge range of operational challenges that need to be overcome by all of the parties involved. Some of those are technical things, and some of those are also issues with space, because we've got people actually occupying different virtual spaces, completing different parts of the process. So for example, we have the supervisor in Zoom present with the student, and then we have a student in the LMS present with the subject coordinator and potentially a moderator. And those two streams are not necessarily overlapping. So the student is having a dialogue with the supervisor who may not be aware of what is happening on the other side of the fence. So we've kind of created a fairly complicated mix for all parties involved to deal with. So yeah, that's a little bit of an overview of some of the complexities involved, and I guess this may have been touched on while I dropped out, but the challenges for students, particularly those that are dealing with multiple technology types. So, for example, the people sitting maths exams are dealing, or they have to be competent in dealing with the LMS, the Gradescope application, an application on their device to scan and make a PDF file of their written workings. They have to be competent in Zoom. They have to be also competent and have access to high quality, reliable internet to be able to do this kind of juggle and dance at once. So yeah, we're really placing a pretty high demand, I think, on all of the parties involved. And yeah, I guess the one that I have a lot of sympathy for, and I have sympathy for everyone, but I definitely have sympathy for the students who have that higher level of overhead to deal with when they're already dealing with a stressful, high stakes summative assessment.
Yeah,
it's a huge communication and technology project.
And that's even from the aspect of how University of Melbourne is approaching this by doing it, without actually proctoring software, and doing it in a more creative way using Zoom sessions where you're broken down to say 15 students and one person virtually, monitoring them over Zoom. But when you go back to traditional proctoring, I've just pasted a link into an article I found this morning actually around proctoring and some of the issues around that. And it becomes a huge nightmare. So this outlines some of the system requirements. So you have to have a PC or a Mac to start with. So you can't use a tablet device or a smartphone. It has to have certain specification, has to have an internal webcam, it has to have a microphone, has to be plugged into power, minimum screen resolution, certain operating systems. If you're doing this at home, you're not allowed any other devices connected to your home internet. I mean, how do you police that? It's just this whole huge range of things, like no dual monitor setups, no tethering to a mobile hotspot, no use of an external webcam. And it's just a complete nightmare.
You would expect too that this kind of a shift, or the for-profit technology sector that caters to this shift, because of course you're talking about ProctorU Examity, Pearson has gotten into the game, that they would have some empirical research to back up the efficacy of this. Does it do what it's supposed to do? And what I found fascinating is, and I won't name names, but I was talking with somebody who's very, very much over this as their research area. They're very interested in academic integrity, cheating, plagiarism, and the technologies involved in higher ed. And they said over and over, they ask, can you show me any empirical evidence to show that you do what you claim to do? And the answer keeps coming up, no. And in fact, in some cases, the agreements that have been signed with universities by these companies preclude the relatively straightforward processes of investigation and quality assurance that we would expect to have. So, it's complicated, invasive, doesn't work.
Yeah. And I think just listening to what Tom was saying, there's a whole equity issue around. I mean, we're seeing research coming in now with rural students not having the internet to be able to really work in this way.
Absolutely.
So there becomes a whole equity issue for students who just can't have both the digital skills or the high bandwidth needed.
So it's one of the real issues, more to do with, us as teachers, that it's actually our conceptual ideas around what is assessment and learning that actually needs to change.
Yeah. Interesting. I actually want to build on Catherine, your view, your point about equity issues. On the other hand, those who are privileged and then born the millennium, they're born with an iPad, an iPhone in their hand, they gone to schools that already have all sorts of technologies, and they'll come to the university expect high-level apps and technology. So they were thinking, oh, wow, university is still doing something that hasn't changed for 10 years. We still do sit-down exam. So there's another counterpoint of those expectations of some students thinking, this is, when the university, the academics, the assessors need to change to adapt to technology more.
Yeah. And to throw sort of something in the mix, if you think of the world of AI and artificial intelligence, the skills you're testing in a closed book exam are recall and memory, and none of those skills will be needed in the future. What you'll need to be able to do is take complex problems with lots of different solutions and work with people with different expertise to come up with, amazing solutions to the modern problems of the world, because anything at that low level will be done by an AI.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where, humans still have a place is in what I would call navigating the unknown. I mean, you can't program that into an AI. I mean, it's just, it can only do what it's been programmed to do. So exactly your point, yeah.
Yeah, but the exams, our assessment practices need to kind of move to where the skills base that we need, and it's not sitting and memorizing and recalling it in a room.
Well, and this is that authenticity tension, isn't it? Yeah. Is that and I'll play off on something that a seminar that was earlier this week, Mike Prosser was sharing his research trajectory in surface versus deep learning. And he said, look, memorization is only worthwhile if it leads to deeper learning. And that's the only real authenticity argument for having people memorize anything, because otherwise we are now at a point technologically where if that's not what's happening with what you're cramming your head with, don't cram your head with it, because you can.
I mean, there's certain knowledge that you want on call very quickly, isn't it? And that's what you need up here. Right.
But it has to then be utilized for something that is a deeper and more complex engagement.
That's right. You've got to be able to process it, yeah.
And our assessments then have to, if they're authentic, any memorization has to then in some way be capitalized on in an authentic way, the kind of way that any of us would use it.
Well, if for the 21st century skills that required for the next generation, it's almost think that we need the assessment more than exam, because we need more, assessments of teamwork, creativity, collaboration, problem solving, critical thinking. That is really hard to use the closed books exam format to achieve those goals in a way. So again, how do we really transform the technology assessment to allow those skills or capability to be assessed online?
Let me actually frame that, if I could, with pitching that out a little bit as, can technology help us? Because while I agree with Siew Fang's point, immediately what I thought of is So who's gonna mark all that? Because of course, if we're talking about a move from, for example, an MCQ-based invigilated examination to one that is a problem-based open book exam, the nature of the students' responses is going to be far more qualitative, richer, which is wonderful, but perhaps less wonderful if you're the person who has to sit down and actually spend all that time scoring it. So are there solutions that technology afford us in this?
Yeah, but not just the technology, though. I think, Chris, I think the design of the assessment process as well. So, you know, if one of the core outcomes for our graduates is collaboration, then why not involve them in the assessment process? So they're actually you know, collaborating on their peers' you know, marking process. And so, you know, peer marking is one way of bringing that in. And you can even assess the peer marking as well. So you know, there's different ways. It doesn't just have to be the lecturer who's the you know, the only marker as such.
Yeah, I wanted to build on Thom's point, because even in the current form, many academics are really find it challenging to do those assessment exams, marking. They find it really challenging to really equally and fairly really assess the capability of students. So I really like to think about and encourage you to rethink, how do we mark? And then the whole idea of where the knowledge sits. Is that sit with the expert academics, or is the expertise sit in the communities, or is the knowledge sit with the students as partners? So this idea of students as partners is more of a create that nuances between, you know, not just a binary between we are the lecturer, you are the student, we teach you and you learn, but redesigning the whole assessments that everybody knows something, everybody could actually be the assessor, because we look at knowledge in a different angle. And how if a student submit a video of a collaborations, and we will get a community members and indigenous elders to comment on that, and we can learn so much out of it.
But I do agree, Chris, that yes, you can use the technology to help you as well, or and sort of think through, well, what technology do we have access to, and how can that help us in rethinking an assessment and getting through some of the pragmatic issues of marking, etc. And so, looking at what's the capability of the LMS. So, you know, and what can it help? How can it help us do something beyond an exam, or which with submissions and marking of more portfolio-based type of assessments. And I guess my own experience of, you know, only just joined University of Melbourne, and my first time using Canvas as an LMS. So, you know, I've used Moodle and Web Crossing and Blackboard in the past, but and setting effectively an e-portfolio type of project-based assessment for the students I'm teaching. Canvas has some great features that allow you to sort of, you know, make the marking of that and submission of that quite, you know, relatively painless. And it's just sort of looking through, how do you do that? So, for example, I've set all my students to create an e-portfolio, and they're using WordPress. And then the assignment is to submit 4 posts over a length of time, you know, 4 posts, and then 4 comments on other participants' portfolios. And so the first issue is, well, how do we find each other's portfolios because they're outside of Canvas? So using the Canvas profile, you know, stick your URL there so we can find it, and we're using an RSS reader as well. But there's various technologies that you can use to manage all of these. You know, what initially seems like a huge amount of work, you can actually use the technology to help you to do that. And then the submission of the assessments, you know, do I have to trawl through? In my case, it's only 20 students, but if you've got, you know, hundreds of students, how do I find their e-portfolio posts that need to be marked? Well, you know, Canvas has made that quite simple for me. I just set that as a web-based assessment, and they copy and paste their nominated post URL into that. And so it's actually really simple. And using the rubric built into Canvas as well. And then getting students to use that rubric as a formative assessment too.
Yeah. It sounds like your point is well taken, though, that if the first question that we should ask is, how can we enhance our assessment and our curriculum and our learning engagement, the first answer should not necessarily be a particular technology. Rather, it should be mixing up and perhaps challenging our assumptions about how we're engaging with our students and how we're assessing them, and then finding technologies that support the exploration exactly. And then the adoption of these new ways.
Yes, we shouldn't be shoehorned in one particular approach by the technology. That's the wrong way.
Right, right.
And as someone who kind of supports the technologies quite closely, we love it when people come up with these creative ideas, and then we have to kind of go, all right, which technology will work with this? Right. Some of them aren't quite there yet. I think the the LMSs, we've got a few add-on products to our LMS, and we can't fit all the scenarios that people come up with. But as we hear more, I think the vendors are going to be adapting these solutions to meet these very broad cases of these assessment practices that are quite novel, I suppose. They're currently novel anyway.
Yeah, and it should be driven by demand as well. So if us as effectively the clients for these software companies are demanding certain solutions, then they need to come up with that, don't they? So
yeah.
But they're adapting and they're listening. Might take a couple of years, but they'll catch up.
That's good news. That's good news. I'd like to come back to something that's woven its way in for the discussion, because I'm also cognizant of the time, and we do want to leave a little time towards the end for people to ask questions and maybe involve some other discussion. Something that keeps coming up is how we position our students. And a point that was raised early on was, are we positioning our students in online open book examinations as cheaters? And is that deficit modeling appropriate or not? On the one hand, we could say, well, because of the shift, we have to be cognizant of it and we have to plan accordingly. On the other hand, perhaps we could equally say, but doesn't that come with certain negative, perhaps even toxic assumptions? How do we negotiate that?
Well, I guess that's part of the key, isn't it? It's that negotiating with your students. Cheating does happen, and it doesn't matter at the end of the day what the assessment type is. If students want to spend that amount of effort into cheating, then they're going to find ways around it. It's just how do you weed out that? I mean, usually it's pretty obvious if it's portfolio project based when you get 10 of the exact same projects submitted. Someone's copied someone else, but it shouldn't be the default that all students will cheat if given the chance.
Mm.
Assessment design is a big part of this. If you've got lots of assessments through the semester that are authentic, small, and kind of are portfolio based or case based, or require bringing in reflections from their own workplace, say if they're postgraduate students, then you've got much less opportunity to cheat in that design, because you need to or collaborate, because there's personal elements to it, there's a frequency to it, you get to know the students' way of working, way of writing. When you have these big high stakes 70% exams at the end of semester, you'll never know how they write or what sort of work they produce.
And I think that's a key point, Catherine, is that if we're using a new type of assessment, we need to change the way we're actually engaging with that assessment as well. So you can't treat an e-portfolio type of assessment as you do an exam and never look at their e-portfolios until they submit at the end. That's too late, and you've got no idea what their thought processes were in the process. So you have to change the way that you engage with that whole learning process.
I would actually think that it is, when we talk about a new normal, it's such an important opportunity for us to even shift the idea of shift the purpose. Why do we learn? And when the purpose is right, we don't cheat. Right? We cheat because we get the purpose of learning wrong. We wanted to pass, we want to get a good job, or we want to get good grade. And that is really the purpose of why to go to university. But if really in the new normal coming that we are in crisis, we need sustainability, we need to change the way that things didn't work in the past, we need to change different. And the students have to say, we got a purpose here. I really need all of those skills to change and I really want to get it. And then these assessments is fantastic because they integrate all of those skills that I need. I want to do it not because of to get good marks, because it helped me to gain new skills to achieve that. So I think that the shifting of purpose will really shift the attitude to assessment.
Yeah, I have been reading research that says we don't teach students enough why academic integrity is important and their place, and why them not cheating has such a big impact on them. So the research I was reading was saying we need to be more explicit and teach more clearly the importance of academic integrity.
Yeah, I think that's a seminal issue, and I've been doing these, as some of you know, I've been doing sessions on open book online exams for some of the faculties, and something that's come up over and over again is, where do you want to start the discussion and the analysis? Do you want to start after you've already collected all of the students' responses, in which case the best case scenario is that you catch the people who have done something wrong? Or do you want to start much earlier, where you begin to have dialogues with students in which, as Catherine suggests, you engage with them around the importance. Why should you maintain your academic integrity as a student? And I agree, there's some powerful emerging research. Some of it's coming out of Deakin University's CRADLE, the Center for Research on Assessment and Digital Learning, around, how do we have those kind of dialogues? Phil Dawson's work, Joanna Tai, I think Margaret Bierman, they're all beginning to look at some of the ways that we can begin to engage with students in a way that isn't deficit modeling, and that lets the students then manage and negotiate their own academic integrity.
I think that's the key from an employer's point of view as well. So, as a teacher of students, I would quite often get rung up by potential employers at the end of the year and say, who would you recommend as your best student that I would like to employ? And one of the key things they would always want is someone who's going to work well with other people and someone who's not going to cheat. So building that sort of ethical base into our students as part of the assessment is key, because that's, as an employer, you want to employ someone that you can trust and that can work with other people. Those are key attributes, but not just passing an exam.
Chris, question. With the idea of ethical behaviour and the meaning of being a student and learning, to what level can we align that to the idea of student voice? The student having a role in this whole machine that we're part of. How do they feel that they're part of it and having a meaningful role?
Yeah, I'll quickly answer because you asked me to, but then also I'll throw it open, and I'd love to hear from Fang too, because I think that's a big engagement question. But one first thing I would say is it's absolutely seminal, Glenn, because if we're talking about, for example, partnering with our students, students as partners is a big concept. University of Queensland is an epicenter for the Students as Partners network. I encourage everyone to look into it. It's the idea that when you begin to establish a more of a productive relationship where students' voices and authority are part of their learning process, we see not only more buy-in, but we actually see heightened academic integrity. And with that, a concomitant lowering of our need to tighten and ever more securely guarantee that this examination absolutely cannot be breached. So to me, I think everyone wins when we see partnering with our students and raising their voices.
Are there other views?
I'm happy to contribute. Yeah, I think that we always look at the students as partners. I always look at the students as partners, and they're equal. They have something special that I don't have. And I always learn a lot from every of my students. So when I have that relationship and trust established, it's totally different. It shifted in a way that that is really drawn my other work. I work a lot in community development, so many of the students already practice in the field. They have amazing experience and network and resources that I may not have as an academic. So by drawing that and shift their relationship, the hierarchy, students actually want my feedback and I want their feedback. In that exchange, you can call it engagement or you can call it shift of paradigms. They don't really want to cheat. They come back to me for more feedback. They said that, Fang, you are the only academic that give me real feedback because I really need that information. I don't need the marks, but I need your feedback. And that, I think, the trust has actually go beyond the assessment, and the trust go beyond the 3 years duration in the university. And that students as partner concepts has actually changed the relationship between the academic and the students, change the relationship attitudes of the assessment task, and also change the relationship between the university and the community. I think we, as an academic or as a university, play a significant role in shifting that paradigm, especially young people these days. The millennium are the change agent. We can't, to me, I think, we can't continue saying that we are the expert to assess their capability. They actually have a lot of experts in their level as well.
Great.
I want to ask the question, be a bit of a devil's advocate, because I talk to a lot of academics who are doing teaching subjects for 2,000 students first year straight out of school, and it's quite different from the postgrad experience, which I think Siew Fang will be talking to. So. And there it becomes a lot, I would imagine it becomes a lot harder to have that change of relationship. What do you think can be done in those situations?
I actually don't really, to me, I actually engage with some young people even in high school. I think the age and maturity doesn't matter. It's the way we approach and engage with them matters. And again, going back to a smaller unit of family relationship, parents and the children. And children are more rebellious. They want to cheat and they don't tell us the truth. If we actually don't have that trust in the hierarchy is maintained. By shifting that, I think if we actually shift the relationship through the way we assess the students, I think the peer review format that the academic use in our research journal and publication is that require that process of, and it really removes certain level of authority out. And trust has shifted. You could change even with first year students, to me.
Well, I think, Catherine, the other thing is the use of technology, which Thomas was talking about, is allowing us to have those more personal connections than we could possibly have in a class of 1,000 students. Yeah. So we are actually operating at an individual student level, just using technology solutions.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. I think, too, that there is this issue, and I think, Catherine, you were bringing up a few different issues in that devil's advocate position, and one of them is, well, how do we partner with students in a massified situation? Because I suspect that massification is not going to go away just because of the new normal. And, when I think about that, I realize you can do it. There's ways of making people feel that they're part of a community and in a productive relationship with the rest of the members of that community. I remember when, about a year and a half ago, I moved to Melbourne, and I thought, okay, wow, this is a real community. Even though it's millions of people, I still felt like I was connected. And there's lots of things that we can do, I think, in order to do that. And just regular dialogue with our students. Some people talk about the "Are you okay?" questions that we can ask, and having opportunities for students to talk through a little bit about their anxieties. Some people talk about intellectual candor, and it's the concept that we share with our students our own shortcomings, our own concerns, and make them understand that we're just fallible human beings. I think all of those things contribute to this overall sense of partnership, and within the context of the topic today, may help students to engage more enthusiastically with assessment and in more academically appropriate ways with fewer problems with integrity.
Yeah, and I agree with Glenn around the use of the technology. Use technology that will help you with what you're trying to achieve, and I guess that comes down to making good choices around is this particular technology going to help me with this particular issue or not? Not is it the only supported technology? So, for example, if you've got 1,000 students and you change from an exam to a portfolio based, how do you track those portfolios? Well, you front load the instead of it all being about the assessment at the end, it becomes more a front loaded issue of how do I track all of those portfolios, and that's where the technology comes in. So, if you're using a portfolio tool that has an RSS feed, and if you don't know what that is, talk to someone who does. Then you can use an RSS reader, and you can have thousands of feeds coming into that, and the software does the checking for you. It's just putting it in there to start with is the biggest issue, and that can even be assigned to someone, or get someone to help you do that. And then all you do is load up your RSS reader each day, and you see there's, here's the new post. Do I need to respond to anything or not? And it's just very, very quick process once it's all been put into the software to track that for you. So there's ways around it using technology.
I think that's the right lens. If the lens we're using technology is to create partnership engagement, then you're looking for those solutions with those technologies, not sort of the policeman type solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And those are two very different intentions, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I think such a huge point, and it seems to be woven into everything that we're saying, which is that the intentionality has to lead the technology.
Yeah, not the other way around. That's just the wrong way.
Yeah.
Well said.
I have another question. With the need to be sensitive to cultural issues, which is obviously very relevant to the whole debate in the US, and obviously our concern about Aboriginal issues in Australia, to what degree can we use technology to improve our cultural sensitivity and the quality of our cultural responsiveness in our class? Is there a view on that? Because that's obviously central to our practice, I would think, going ahead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because often, I'm from New Zealand, and so we're a little bit different with a bicultural framework between Maori and European or Pākehā and British effectively. And the assumption often is that Maori culture does not use technology. But in actual fact, technology can empower a disadvantaged community and give them a voice. So it's kind of looking at, well, does this particular technology have a appropriate role in actually amplifying the downtrodden or empowering them, etc., rather than stopping with, well, no one has access. So it's kind of looking at it a different way, I think.
I'd be interested to explore what authenticity means in the context of Glenn's question, because if we're talking about real life, well, different people's lives have reality that is different. And so when we're talking about Aboriginal rights and different populations, I think it's an opportunity for us to say, and perhaps even engage with different stakeholders, saying, what's most authentic to you in terms of learning, and begin to try and weave some of that into our assessment practices.
I might say something on not just cultural diversity. Technology can enhance and bring people together, including disabilities access as well. Last week, the e-symposiums we host is Engage University e-symposium. One of the presenters actually talked about disability access and switch on her PowerPoint presentation with captions. And then it's such a simple thing that to do, then allow greater access of knowledge to the people who may not be able to hear well. And I think technology does play a role in allowing access, and how do we translate the subjectivity of cultures? I think that will be trickier. That to me, it's unpacking our own lens as assessor, as academic, to, for example, with the Indigenous-led assessment design would be useful to really embracing different way of valuing what is knowledge and what is of value. Could be one way to address cultural issues and then social equity issue.
Well, I think your earlier point, Siew, where you talked about your partnering and effectively academic humility and taking away the authority and making more of an equal relationship with the student, that's effectively addressing exactly the point that Chris makes about authenticity. What's the authenticity for them? Well, until they've got a voice in the teaching relationship, teacher-student relationship, there is no authenticity. It's all becomes our authenticity, our world that we're creating. So that relationship and that student voice and that partnership is part of this cultural question, I think.
Yeah. In a lot of research, you look at co-design, co-develop, and co-evaluate. Why not do it in learning and teaching? Can't we involve our student in co-designing our pedagogy, our assessment, our evaluation? The student will give us evaluation as well of our evaluation, and the whole process in the cycle, and that will be quite useful.
It comes down to being authentic in our design of the learning environments, and also in, I hate the word, but the delivery or how we approach the actual interaction. Because you can talk about authenticity, but be completely inauthentic in your teaching still, So. Oh
yeah. We've probably all encountered a few of those situations, even when we were students, or maybe especially when we were students. As people were talking about this, I was thinking a few years ago, I was teaching a subject, and I did exactly that. I told my students, all right, so I want you to help me design the assessments, and you design what do you think is most valuable and most authentic. Not everywhere, but these were a group of students who had some work experience as well. And so I gave them a significant amount of ownership of redesigning the assessments and some of the readings and some of the other curriculum structures. If it was undergraduates, I probably would have given them a smaller scope, but I would have done it. And it was amazing to me to see the investment and the ownership that students saw, and their report in the student evaluations of how much more authenticity they felt was a part of the subject that they were in. And so I think it just can't be said enough how important it is to do these kind of things with our students.
And I think it can be scaffolded. It doesn't have to be the domain of third year or postgraduate learning. It's, our first year students can do that, but it needs to be made explicit to them why you're doing what you're doing, and give them enough time to reflect, etc. Because my wife's a kindergarten teacher, and kindergarten learning environments are all about the student, and it's all project based. It's all what do you want to learn about today, and how can I help you find out about dinosaurs, etc. And then we knock that out of them with exams in compulsory education. So they come to us initially, kids are creative and explorers, and then we turn them into rote learners.
Yes, the real reason the dinosaurs died. Invigilated examinations.
I must add to it. I think that it's really changed it. I did something similar to what Chris did, and I look forward to the assessment. I think I want to read their work because it's so creative, and then I don't find assessment and marking as painful, but it's such a joy, and so it's just a benefit to a lot of people.
Let me just really quickly, because we're about out of time. Are there one or two, either maybe one burning question that somebody else has? We have a couple other participants. Otherwise, maybe just ask one or two people to come up with a big point from the panel. Give a moment for the folks who are here
One idea might be a question on the choices of tools. Catherine, you've talked about demand, meaning the tools come, but it does seem like there's a bit of a disconnect, to be honest, from the teaching end of things right through to, your organisation of such a big budget and huge amount of work that you're doing. How on earth do we make that more nimble and really reflecting the new normal, which is this tool is useful. Oh, crikey, that's gone. We're on to this tool. I mean, that's incredibly fast within a year or so. How on earth do we run your big organisation without lagging behind and becoming old-fashioned? And
I think a lot of it comes down to effectively digital literacies for our academic staff, and not just relying on Catherine's team. And let's get someone else to do the work for us and tell us what to use. It should come down to, me as an academic in this domain, I need to be hungry and exploring what's appropriate and upskill myself as well. Not just rely on external groups to do it for us.
It has been a bit of a ride. We have put in more tools in this last few months than we have in the last few years. And even for us to learn them to the depth we need to be able to support them has been, we're still getting there. And then you have things like Canvas, which actually does monthly updates. And all these products moving to the cloud, where they actually update themselves every month, has added another layer of complexity as far as keeping up the updates and communicating those as needed to the university. But yes, I suppose in the end we all have to get more digitally literate. We're adapting our processes. I think we've done quite a good job to adapt our processes to deal with this constant change, and we're building much better relationships with our vendors to, like with Gradescope, we have been working very closely with them, and they're now producing reports to suit our needs and changing the product to suit our needs. So that vendor relationship becomes an important thing that we need to manage as an organisation, to push the changes that the teaching community needs. Yeah. Teaching learning. Yeah.
Well, folks, I hate to bring it to a close when it's a lively discussion and an ongoing one, but I hope that that's part of the sustainability, is that we can continue these discussions even if it's not right here, right now. And I just want to thank everyone for participating in this, our first webinar of the new normal on a subject that I think everyone is interested in. And I hope it establishes a good beginning for what will be a lively and valuable webinar series. So thank you to everyone who participated, especially our panelists.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks for coming along.
Thanks all of you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.